Hey guys, it's Ross here. Today I want to talk you through the character rig I created for my honours project, which was the final project at university. The kind of focus of this project was really aiming to solidify like my core skills with character rigging. It focused on a lot of the basics, but just doing those basics to a really high level. So as you can see, this is the character we created. It's called Puppy. Not entirely sure why, we just went with that. And Puppy originally came from a concept that I created, a very quick concept, kind of based on a dinosaur, kind of insecty type animal. I wanted to definitely create a quadruped. Just in the past, I've kind of mostly focused on bipeds. Well, some of the bipeds were fairly different from each other. The actual core of the character rig themselves, they're all fairly similar. So this concept was created and it was delivered to one of the other computer artists in my year, a guy called Justin Dolan, and he took the concept and created a sculpt. And this is the sculpt here. He did a really good job with the sculpt. A lot of detail in here, most of which came from the kind of concept itself, but he kind of was given free rein to, if he thought anything needed to be tweaked or altered, then he had complete free rein. It didn't have to be to the exact concept I drew up. And as with all the character rigging projects I've done in the past, this one began with taking this sculpt and creating a retopology. The mesh of the sculpt itself was really far too far too dense to create a rig around it, and the retopology was created. This retopology started with a really basic kind of blocky, kind of just an outline really. This was just to ensure that there was sufficient kind of edge loops and polygons around the kind of areas that are really going to articulate the knee, kind of, for example. It's a more dense area than, say, compared to the thigh, where there's only going to be one joint. I think they're kind of done really well. Covered a lot of the areas well. The tail was good. Yeah, the front legs were good. There was issues with the kind of upper shoulders, neck, kind of pincer area. With all quadrupeds, this is a kind of a busy area. There's a lot of connections and things here, and a lot of separate parts that move. And with the addition of these pincers, that was kind of more so. But we went through a couple of iterations with the sculpt and kind of extruded the neck out to kind of help with deformation around this area. But yeah, it turned out pretty good. And yeah, everything's in a reasonable condition. This retopology was then subdivided to get a more dense mesh. And this subdivision basically just breaks down each polygon into kind of multiple versions. I think it breaks down each polygon by 6 in this case, just because we really wanted to create something quite high dense in comparison to some of my older ones that have all kind of had fairly low limits. And yeah, this was great. A lot more of the details kind of came out as they were kind of reattached to the sculpt. And this kind of later on in the process was emphasised even more with normal maps that were baked into this. But as for the kind of high level retopology, I was really quite happy with it. And I remember at the time thinking that this was a very high density retopology, which in kind of hindsight it's not really. There's much denser models out there, but for myself it's definitely the kind of densest I'd worked with. With the retopology all finished up, I moved on to kind of the skeletal position, as you can see here. Yeah, the skeletal structure was quite a long process on this project. There was lots of iterations and a lot of trial and error, kind of particularly with the spine. Originally, the spine was much lower in the body, going through the centre. That was to kind of ensure that the deformation on the kind of top and the bottom was shared equally. These spikes running along the back caused quite a lot of issue. Originally, when when the spine went through the middle, the spikes themselves had their own joints, but the deformation for them was completely off. It was really quite poor. So the spine was moved up slightly, and a new root joint was put in. This was to kind of ensure that the world axis was kind of still kept centre, so that the character would move forward and back like fairly easily. But kind of once that issue was figured out, the next kind of thing was the kind of shoulder area, the shoulder neck area. Kind of, as I said previously, on quadrupeds this is always a kind of difficult area. Getting the spine to move properly and kind of keep the head in the correct positioning and the arms in the correct positioning, and with this project the pincers in the correct positioning is quite difficult. So it was broken up. The shoulders were connected to a joint further back than the pincers, and that was connected further back than the neck and the face joints. But yeah, the tail was fairly straightforward. With the tailbone, the initial joints should always be the larger, and they should kind of get progressively more smaller as it goes down the chain. This allows it to kind of fold back on itself. Although that extreme's not really needed for this project, it's still kind of good practice to have the joints decrease in size and length the further down the chain you get. And apart from that, those major issues, everything's fairly straightforward. The front and back feet don't have any foot rolls on them or anything. Again, like I was saying, the project was really focused on just getting the basics right. There's nothing too extreme in here, and there wasn't really a need for a foot roll. The only thing that was created with this rig was a walk cycle, and a fairly basic walk cycle at that. There was also very simple IKs onto the appropriate joints. The front legs just used a straightforward rotation plane IK. The hind joints had spring solver IKs. Just quadrupeds obviously have 3 bones in the rear leg chain, and therefore like a basic IK wouldn't really work with it. The tail used just a simple spline IK, and the spine also used a spline IK as well. These are all fairly standard, what you would expect out of most rigs, and that kind of sums up the skeletal structure. With the skeleton all completed, I then moved on to creating the controllers and binding the skeleton to the mesh. So I'll take you through these controllers first. They're all fairly standardized, as usual. Down the center of the character, they're all colored yellow. The right hand side is blue and the left hand side is red. This is just to kind of make it as easy as possible for the animators to select the correct controls. In some kind of animations, things can all get a bit cluttered and congested, so this tries to just make it slightly easier. Each of the controllers as well is I tried to create them to mimic what they were controlling. So the feet are obviously fairly self-explanatory, but the toes, so obviously you can tell fairly easily which toe is which. The hip is kind of created to kind of follow the shape of an actual hip bone. And again, this is all just to kind of make it as easy as possible for animators. These controllers are then connected to the joints themselves, that with the use of skin weighting. But I'll take you through some of these just now. The front arms are quite happy with. There is still some issues around the shoulder. Kind of missed vertex and stuff. I had a lot of issues when I was exporting the weights and then changing the positioning of the joints and then bringing the weights back in. I'm not entirely sure what caused this. There's definitely some issues down with naming conventions, but Yeah, but generally, it really moves quite nicely. There's also a point constraint on here to move the elbow. The underside of the character mesh really kind of struggled. As I mentioned earlier, the spine was moved up to help with the deformation with the spikes, but due to this, the actual skeletal structure was quite far away from the bottom, therefore the deformation's a bit weaker. Going back through things now, I can obviously see much more issues than when I originally did it, but that's kind of always the case, I think, with these things. The rear leg, I'm quite happy with as well, considering I think the design of the rear leg and what was taken through into the sculpt was maybe slightly off. I mean, even without deforming it, it's kind of, I was never really that pleased. Odd angles, like the toes themselves kind of curve out. I think maybe some more time could have been put into this in an early stage, just to have got this right. I made my life slightly easier, but working with what I had, I'm quite happy. What I would have liked with the rear leg, I would have liked some of the muscles, or what looks to be muscle, to deform slightly better. And I think that would have been relatively easy to figure out. Maybe just spending slightly more time. But yeah, like I said, I'm fairly happy. And I've not mentioned yet, but everything on this project was done manually, so I didn't kind of use I didn't use any of the kind of the bind methods or anything within Maya. It was all flooded onto the root joint, individually distributed down the kind of chain. I was quite happy with the tail as well. Although this also had its own design issues. It wasn't until later on where I actually got in touch with animators. One of the questions they asked was how the tail was supposed to move, which I was a bit taken aback by. But then, in hindsight, looking back at it, should it swing from left to right, or should it swing up or down, or should there be very little movement? There's loads of things that got skipped. Like I was just saying, back at the design stage, right at the very first concepts, a lot of these should have been addressed, but that's not really done any work on character concepts at all. So it's not really where my area of expertise, as you would say. As you can see here, the kind of spikes are an issue. I'm sure there would have been a simpler way to address these, but it is what it is. They've all been mirrored as well, so the right hand side will be identical to the left. The hips here add slightly extra control over where the legs are to be. Again, as I mentioned, yeah, there's definitely a lot more work that could have been put into this, but the project's on a time limit, and overall I'm pretty happy with what I created. The pelvis, the spine. It's also probably worth mentioning here that no restraints or limitations have been added onto any of this, which is always the intention when you pass it on to animators, but yeah, again, everything was focused on the basics and how it worked. I'm really kind of happy with the shoulder controller, although yeah, some of the issues are still cropping up that came on the left hand side. But actually taking the time to think about the length of this joint and where the shoulder should actually be kind of coming up, the kind of movement arc, quite happy with that. And so yeah, overall
while there is still a very substantial amount of work that could be done to improve the rig, I'm pretty happy with what I've accomplished. The character rig's really only one side of what was done in the project. There's a lot of background stuff, a lot of research, and a lot of interviews that were conducted to kind of inform findings and kind of drive my dissertation forward. Kind of leads me into the kind of extra part of this project that I was quite keen to move into, and that was the use of scripting. A character rigger is going to require to have a reasonable knowledge of scripting, and it was almost always my weakest point. So on this project we kind of started playing about with basics and learning kind of what was what, and the plan was to create a tool for this character rig, tool that would kind of take all of these components, so the character mesh and the controls and the skeletal system and the weights, and move them onto an optimized model that would then be used in gaming engines. And this was a massive amount of trial and error. There was lots of different plans put in place and lots of roadblocks and issues here and there, and the kind of idea of this tool that we were creating was concepted and reconcepted kind of several times, and quite late on in the project we found out that kind of tools from within Maya aren't actually as kind of useful as we were expecting. Originally this small piece of script here, the poly reduce, this was what we were wanting to use to kind of reduce the density of the character mesh, and as you can see here it's not exactly pretty. So this is the character mesh kind of optimized by 60%, and it loses a lot of detail even when the normal map's added onto it. So yeah, that was a no-go. The tool kind of then started looking at using the lower resolution retopology, which is still fairly well done, rather instead of the kind of reduced mesh, and that's currently what I'm working on now. This rig transfer tool uses the class systems or class functions within Python, and to be honest I'm still kind of getting my head around it, and this tool then will essentially bring in the low resolution topology into the scene, create a version of the skeleton to connect to that, and transfer the skin weighting to the lower resolution mesh, and then reattach all the controllers and things like that. And that's kind of what's got planned for once this project's over. There's still a fair bit of work to do, and the guys in Axis have been really useful and are willing to continue helping me even though the kind of project's finished and my mentorship period's over. So yeah, hope you enjoyed the quick walkthrough of my character rig. Thanks very much, guys.